Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul, the podcast that transcends the boundaries between science and spirituality. Prepare to be uplifted, transformed, and awakened to create a path to healing your own life physically, emotionally, and spiritually by bridging the gap between science and soul. Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul. Today's guest is a traditional herbalist, Jane Hawley Stevens, author of The Celestial Garden, growing herbs, vegetables, and flowers in sync with the Moon and Zodiac. And she sees the interconnection of plants, planets, and people for health and proper timing. Through her herbal wellness line, Elements Organic Herbals, she connects people to the source of their wellness, nature. Jane and her husband David were awarded the Organic Farmers of the Year in 2020. Certified organic since 1989, Jane, David, and crew grow herbs and vegetables on their 130-acre farm in the Baraboo Bluffs of Wisconsin. Through the decades of working outdoors, Jane understands the wisdom of tuning into nature and understands all is connected. So welcome, Jane. It's such an honor to have you as a guest today.
Thank you, Dr. Lottie. I'm really happy to be here this evening.
You're such an amazing person because you have such a deep understanding of the plants, the chakras, the moon, the planets, and the whole web of life and how everything is really connected. And that's my passion as well, is that everything is connected. So before we get into the chakras and the plant and the moon phases and all of that, how did you get into this work?
Well, it started actually when I was in high school and I had to pick out what I wanted to study in college. I still remembered the moment my grandmother had taken me out in the woods in northern Wisconsin to pick blueberries. And that moment was like I was in a magical place. So when I was deciding what I should study, I remembered how much I loved being out in nature. So I chose horticulture as a study at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I went through that program, and when I graduated, my first job, I was asked to put in a herb garden. So at that point, I really feel like plants chose me. Um, so then I learned about the culture, like how to grow these plants, and started just dabbling in using them for cooking and crafts. But when my son was born in 87, I had taken him to the doctor a couple of times for earaches, and they just really didn't have anything. They put him on antibiotics, and that was in the middle of the 80s where antibiotics were very much overused. I just wasn't happy with the results at all. And at that point, I had a good herb library and a great herb collection. So I still remember how just curious and open-minded I was about checking my herb book to see if there might be something out in nature that could help him. And it was just so amazing because it was this common weed that the Europeans brought over, mullein. So I picked that weed and made that remedy, and I was so impressed how quickly it worked. I just had never seen anything work so fast and so effectively. And so then I felt like I just realized what my career would be. There would be no turning back on learning more and more about how nature can support us on our path in that way.
Wow, that's a great story. I have a boy that was also born. I have two boys, 86 and 88. So right in that same time period. And my firstborn also lots of ear infections. And I can't agree more. It was just antibiotics after antibiotics back in that day. Now you use the mullein. Is that something you give orally or put drops in the ear or?
Yeah, so it's so simple. I remember thinking, how could it be this simple and work? And at the time, as nature would have it, right, the mullein was blooming. So I went and collected the flowers, and you just warm those in olive oil. So it's just then you drop it in the ear. Um, And if anyone has ever heard of the doctrine of signatures, it's a philosophy of looking closely at plants to see how they could be used. And if you look at mullein flowers on the stalk of the mullein plant, they almost look like little ears coming out. So that would be the doctrine of signatures. They're giving a little clue on how they could be used.
Mhm. That's so interesting because when we studied herbs in med school, because I'm a naturopathic physician, um, the herbalists, the teachers would tell us that no, if this you when you pick the plant, it sort of looks many times what it's supposed to help with. So you keep, if they somebody who has a problem with a knee and it's crooked or something, you look for the one that's the crooked plant. So what you're saying about the mullein with the ears sort of makes me remember what they were saying. How do you look at that? Is there some kind of a connection with the plant and the way it looks?
What I have read, and I believe this, it's the observation and connecting with the plant and the nature. And I believe part of it is coming from the plant and from the bigger picture of nature's power, but also it really helps to engage your psyche, especially in that harvesting process. Like you say, a crooked stem about somebody's knee, suddenly that crooked stem will help you remember that person you're thinking of. And, we all know now about the power of intention and making those connections. The plant giving you little clues or reminding you of somebody. I've had some really cool experiences with that too.
Yeah, do you want to share any stories about that or?
Oh, well, okay. So first of all, I have to say that I'm not a doctor and I can't claim to treat, mitigate, or cure any diseases because truly I'm just a folk herbalist and I'm a gardener first, and I've never been a practitioner, but I do know how plants work. And so this was a very fun story, but I was thinking of my friend in Austin, Texas, husband, who is very like sensitive, and found that Valerian, he was insomniac and Valerian would agitate him. 10% of the people who use Valerian, it agitates them. And I found that those are the more sensitive, the more psychic type of people have a harder time with Valerian. And so I'm weeding out my Valerian patch and I'm weeding out a plant called wild lettuce. And I was weeding it out and started looking at those stems. And I thought of the old Beatrix Potter book, The Flopsy Bunnies. And this, I can tell you're smiling. You probably read those books to your
Right.
kids. So in this book, the bunnies went over to the compost pile of Mr. McGregor's garden and ate all the lettuces that had bolted. And as Beatrix Potter said, because lettuce is soporific or sleep inducing. So I looked at that and I thought, well, there's a clue. And also, I had a meditation teacher, Lei Guimarães, for 25 years, who came from an esoteric school in Brazil. And she told me that in Brazil, people who were insomniac could buy like a romaine lettuce, cut the leaves off, and make a tea out of the stem. So I had never heard about that in contemporary herbalism, and what I personally love as a folk herbalist about this story, that was so unscientific. I did not take that plant into a lab and look for constituents, but my references were Beatrix Potter and my meditation teacher. And sure enough, when I looked it up in my old herb books, that was a known sleep remedy. So I developed, through my line for Elements Organic Herbals, developed this product that happens to be my best-selling tincture.
Wow, what a
So,
great story. Right. It's like
yeah.
guided by spirit and nature itself.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
So, what wisdom have you gained by working with medicinal herbs for 4 decades?
Wow, just so much. And I'm just so grateful that the plants called me into the field, really. But I have found that really, for me, there's a plant that can help with almost every ailment. Right now I'm dealing with a really chronic hip condition and I can allay some of my pain, but still there's a time and a place for doctors, I believe. But I have found that really plants offer us so much and nature offers us so much. And, we're going to get into some of the other subjects I've been studying after just the plants, but by layering on these other subjects like meditation and astrology and things like that, the chakra system, I can see so much support that comes from nature. It's just been so fascinating to see how nature really does support us. And I've had so many times where I've reached to nature for remedies and they just work so fast. Like, for example, I had a group of grade school kids here, and I was showing them plantain, a very common, not the banana plantain, but the rosette of broadleaf that grows in temperate regions in the grasses, right? So anyway, I was showing them how it works so good for mosquito bites or insect bites or bee stings. And this happened actually twice, which was both with school children were like prompted, like as if I told the bee, now's your turn. Then along comes the bee and stings one of the children. And we get that plantain and put it on. And both times the kid just yelled, it really works.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
amazing. That's amazing.
yeah.
Yeah. And I know that, I wanted to get into the chakras and all of that, because you relate the plants to the chakras. So I'm just going to give it to you. So whatever you want to share about that.
Well, this was another, turning lemons into lemonade situations where we had my husband and I also has a horticulture degree, and it was our life dream to have this family farm. And so, here we are, we're getting started, and our my production area was pretty small. It depends what you consider small. So maybe 40 by 60 feet long. And so I had my perennial herbs in there like thyme, lavender, and sage. But we had a winter that had no snow and very cold temperatures. So these plants froze and died. So in the spring, when I went out there, I saw that I had lost all those crops and quickly realized that this would be a great spot for a formal garden because David and I met at botanical gardens and we have a love not just of nature and wild places, but also of formality. So I thought this would be a great spot to put in a formal garden to use for educational purposes. Just about that same time, my friend gave me a book on the chakra system. And on the cover, if anyone's familiar with the chakra system, you usually have those beautiful seven circles going up with those beautiful designs. And I looked at that and I thought that looks like a garden design. So I based this garden on the chakra system and started planting plants that support each of those areas and adding the colors that are associated with those chakras. And, I get to teach in that garden, and it's very exciting for me to have specimen plants. So, out in my production fields, I'll have rows and rows of herbs, but here I can just bring in a couple plants that aren't in my products that people maybe just heard about on through the media or heard about these plants or saw them in plastic bottles, and I get to introduce them to the real plant. So it's a really lovely garden to teach people about this interconnected connectiveness between the chakra system and plants and
Wow.
colors.
Yeah. And so are there specific plans for different chakras or?
For sure. So, if we're going to talk about, let's just start with the third chakra because that's your solar plexus, your power center. And by taking classes through the Kepler College and learning astrology, um, it's ruled by Mars, of course, the warrior, right? So here's your power center. So I put plants that are helpful for the immune system to keep you strong, and a classification of plants called adaptogens. These are plants that help you stay strong and function well under stressful conditions. Adaptogens, that term was coined by the Russians I think it was just the 1960s when they started studying how various plants and how they could help their athletes perform better and their, ballerinas and their politicians and everybody. And I love that they did a study on plants, including these plants. And so they preferred Eleutherococcus and Costas, which is now just called Eleuthero. For a while, we were calling it Siberian ginseng, but it's not from really Siberia and it's not ginseng. So now the herbalists are recommending that we just call it Eleuthero.
Wow. And so that would be good for the solar plexus. It's interesting. So the solar plexus, kind of like your power, like you said, and that it would be ruled by Mars, and then that there's a plant that's connected to it. I mean, it's just incredible when you start. If we all just had this knowledge, or if we were taught this in school, right, and the interconnectedness of how everything is interconnected, the planets, the plants, ourselves, the energy centers of our body, we're, we're just these little magical creatures here on Earth. So people who so like adaptogens, we learned adaptogens are, if you're stressed, then take adaptogens, or if you're really tired, take adaptogens, because it sort of levels you out. So
Yeah, it works with the adrenals to manage, the flow of your cortisol and things like that. So
yeah,
yeah, I love what you just said about don't you wish we would be taught these things? Because if we were, we would feel much more supported and we would have a connection with nature and all those things that are natural out
yeah,
there. And that would be so disastrous to a capitalistic system, I think,
right.
because
Yeah.
because we have so
Everything
much.
is money, especially in this country, I think, because it makes you realize that if we just had the knowledge, less people would be sick, people would be more productive, people would be happier, right? But it's just our whole education system is just geared towards, let's teach them math, and what about everything else? What about how to survive, how to be, calm in your life, how to feel good about yourself? It's like we've forgotten the humanness of being human. It's all about competition and money and power.
Yeah, and like more classes on cooperation and working together. And I think, if you're even interested in astrology too, you'll see that those barriers are kind of breaking down. And I'm sure there are more schools that are teaching some of these things.
Yeah. And so are there are the flowers or the plants coordinated with the color of the chakras too? Like the solar
Yeah,
plexus is yellow. Would that be yellow plants, or
yes, that's right.
right?
Yep, and cherry plants. I also put, well, and then moving into the heart chakra, color green, I have plants that make you happier to be on planet Earth, like rose, lavender, lemon verbena, lovely plants. And and then what else is so wonderful about this garden is often the plants the weedy plants move into the areas that they help to support. For example, motherwort moves into the heart chakra, and Leonurus cardiaca is the Latin name, and that one is one of the top herbs for supporting heart health.
Fascinating. So
Yeah,
so
pretty
incredible,
lovely.
right? What about people try to be spiritual and the crown chakra? So that's lavender. So for people who um, would like to be a medium, that don't know how to communicate with the spirit world, that haven't made the connection yet with their spirit guides, uh, is there an herb for those people?
Well, I do have mugwort up there that is known to help with dream time. And just to honor the angels, I have Angelica, Archangelica. What a great Latin name that
Right.
is, right?
I love it.
So that one likes it cool and moist though, so I wouldn't grow in every climate. But I do like the mugwort in that area too, because of the dream time and maybe being more open to some of the messages you could be getting.
Yeah, and so if you if you go down to the root chakra, then um, the core chakra, stability, safety. what plants would those people need?
Well, I have more symbolic plants there, but I have another great story of a plant moving in. So, because the first chakra, as you said, was base and stability, it's the only chakra that's a square shape, where the others are circular. So I found my dad had cancer at the time I was designing this, so I put in a boxwood hedge. So it creates this really nice stability for the base of this garden. And the planet associated with that is Saturn, of course. Limitations, boundaries, rules, right? So I have that boxwood hedge and I put in a rugosa rose because to me that's what you would want, love in your family structure. And then it dawned on me just last year, it's love with a little prickles, which is very much like a family. So I had this rugosa rose there in the middle of the boxwood square. And one spring, an elderberry moved in, elder plant.
Mhm.
And I thought, oh, I love those plants so much. I love them when they're blooming and when they're fruiting, and they're just so wonderful. I can't bear to weed it out. I walked away. I couldn't weed it, even though it was going to compete with this rose. And I walked away and I realized it's the elder and it put itself in the first chakra. So I thought that was so perfect. And they work together well. The rose can still bloom and the elder still fruits. So it's a really cool story about that garden. A plant that I like for the first chakra. So I have a yin, I have a peony in that area. And my mother told me a Wisconsin folk tale that you should have your grandmother's peony from her farm. And my grandmother's sister, who's in her 90s, happened to come last year and said that that peony actually came from Czechoslovakia, or what was Bohemia at the time. So anyway, so this plant, comes from a lineage of my grandmother, but in the Chinese system of medicine, peony root is used as a yin tonic, so it's cooling and moistening. Something good for me as a hot Aries. So I do use that peony root, and I consider it a good first chakra herb.
So fascinating. Um, so how do you, I know you have this chakra garden. How does that work, the chakra garden as an educational garden? Is it mostly for kids that come in, or how does that work?
It is a scratch and sniff garden, so kids would be welcome because there's a lot of good smells in there. But really, it's people who are interested in herbs. So we have a we've had an open farm day for over 30 years here. I don't know how much longer it'll go in June. And that group, which is like over 100 people, we break it into two groups. And then my husband talks about trees and shrubs because he's works at the university's Arboretum as a curator there. So that's his specialty. Um, and so we break it into two different sessions. Anyway, so it's mainly for the open farm day, and we just had like a garden club come yesterday. I have the integrative health fellows from the University of Wisconsin that come once a year later in the season. So, it's just important for me to connect people to plants. And, I've got this great collection. It's just gives my life a lot of meaning to be able to share it in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. So fun. I wish I lived closer. Here I am in
You're welcome
Arizona.
to come.
So now have your areas of interest in herbs, organic growing, meditation, and astrology. How would that merge for a greater realization?
Well, what I have found, especially when I was writing my book, The Celestial Garden, growing herbs, vegetables, and flowers in sync with the moon and zodiac. So I was studying, I was practicing according to the Old Farmer's Almanac for about 30 years. I would just buy that and plant according to those systems. There'd be charts in the back. But then, there was no contemporary book on the subject, and I'm so fascinated and love it so much that I had already had the organic growing and the herbalism and some of these other disciplines that I was familiar with. But so I started taking these astrology classes. But when I took that, I could really see how we're really in this magnificent matrix of healing and beauty from the earth and heavens. Like, because I looked down for 40 years and I saw all the support coming from the plants, and then I was being gaining a deeper understanding of how looking up all of these systems were could teach you timing of things and greater insights on how life works and great understandings. And one of the cool things is just about the cycles. Like as a gardener, of course, you're very tuned into the cycles with the seasons, and especially in the Midwest where we have very distinct seasons. But then learning astrology too, you just see how, these wheels are turning and everything just keeps changing and doors are opening and closing all the time. So, by gaining a deeper understanding of these natural systems, you really get to feel like you're supported. I think that's my biggest message is how much that the more we can tune into this old wisdom, the more we can feel this support.
So how is it, for example, how is the moon tied in to, does it matter the phase of the moon when you're planting or harvesting? I mean, you always hear, the harvest moon and things like that, but I didn't grow up on a farm, so how does that all relate to the moon phases and all?
That's a great question. So the moon phases are the first like entry to learning about gardening according to the moon, because let's start with the new moon, the dark of the moon. So at that time, is a good time to start. You can start your seeds because it's going to start a growth. So if you even just look at the phases of the moon, it goes from being invisible to start to grow larger, waxing. And this is a message that I love to teach and nobody knows it. I've taught this class for over 20 years and nobody knows when does the new moon rise. And so the new moon rises at dawn. That's why we don't see it. That's why it's the dark of the moon. So the sun, the moon, and the earth are in alignment. So when the sun rises, the moon is right there and we don't see it. So starting at that new moon, it's a time of new beginnings. And this works with your life too. This would be a great time to start projects and to begin new things. And like anything you want to be curious about and open up, picture like a newborn baby just opening their eyes and trying to discover everything. Like this is the energy of that. So it's a good time for starting seeds, and especially, I'm not sure why, but it's recommended to start seeds that produce their seeds outside the fruit, such as lettuce and spinach, during that first week. Then after 1 week, about 1 week after the new moon becomes the first quarter. And that's when the moon is shaped like like a D, actually. I don't know. We'll just call it a capital D.
Right?
Okay, and if you use the word dock, you can understand how these moon phases are moving through the month. So when the moon is shaped like a D, that's the first quarter. The O is the full moon, and when it's shaped like a C, that's the last quarter. And so you're going to find the moon, days and nights up in the sky, and now you'll be able to tell what phase it's in. So 1 week after the new moon, you'll see the moon shaped like a D, and that's the first quarter. And that's when you still are planting seeds. These are seeds that are have their seeds inside the fruit, like tomatoes and peppers, squashes, pumpkins, things like that. At the full moon is so anyone who lives near the ocean knows that the tide is higher at the full moon. Well, the main theory of gardening by the moon is that the water table is higher at this full moon time. So even underneath the Midwest, yeah, I'm not near the ocean, but the water table is getting pulled up because this is a magnetic pull. It's not just happening at the ocean. So right now, then at the full moon, you'll have a water table close to the soil surface. And so that's a time for planting your root crops because then the water is getting pulled down and it helps to pull the energy in for root crops. So not only carrots, beets, potatoes, but also perennials, bulbs, and things where you want to develop a nice root system. And then a week after that, when the moon is shaped like a C, that's called the last quarter, and that is a time of rest. Also, according to the Farmer's Almanac, a time of setting traps and killing things. But you could also do your pest control there if you have any pests on your plants. This would be the best time because the energy is at the weakest at between the last quarter and the new moon, that last week before the new moon. So, like, there's not as much like energy pumping through life. And so if the bugs are at their weakest, it's a good time to try to eliminate them and, setting traps, also a good time to rest. I love that there's a built-in time for dreaming and rest. That this would be the best time. Like if you wanted a meditation getaway, that would be a good time. It just it gets quieter. So that's how that cycle works.
Fascinating. I mean, it makes perfect sense when you're talking about it, because right, everybody knows about the tide at the beach, like water is high or water is low. As especially I lived in California for 18 years, so you're so aware of the high and the low tide. But then when you think of, the crime rate is always higher at the full moon, and there's always worse drivers. Like I live in
Yeah.
Phoenix, so the drivers are always way worse when it's a full moon. I know when it's a full moon because I don't want to get on the freeway, that kind of feeling. Everybody's just weaving in and out of traffic. So it makes perfect sense because it has that magnetic pull on our bodies, right? Because we know that statistically from the crime rate, and everybody gets a little cuckoo, there's just more crime. But that makes
Yeah.
perfect sense because we're being pulled, right? And the menstrual cycle in women also follows the moon. So we're so affected by it, but still, we don't know anything about it. It's so, gosh, they should teach us all of this in school, right? It's
I think
survival. I mean,
so.
this is basic knowledge and understanding of how we function here on Earth. So it's just fascinating. I never even thought of planting the plants that the water in the ground is also going to be affected. I mean, it's just fascinating,
Yeah.
right?
And
Never
it
even
makes
thought
so
of it.
much sense.
You're right. It makes so much sense when you say that, but never thought of it. So just amazing. So now you're here. I mean, the way you're teaching about the plants, it's not just plants. You're teaching about really the way we're connected to the web of life itself. It's like a shift in our perspective, the way we perceive ourselves here, right? Is the interconnectedness of the human beings, the plants, the astrology, everything. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, isn't it great to open up your consciousness and see all of these systems that just are right there, but yet so obscure? It's like hidden in plain sight, right?
Yeah. So what is your favorite plant?
Oh boy, I love lemon balm. I love lemon balm so much because it does everything. Um, if you look, well, first of all, it tastes good. It's very easy to grow. It's bountiful where you grow it. Like it does reseed, which makes some people a little upset with it, but I just tell them you should cut it before it flowers, harvest that and use it for your winter teas because if you cut it before it flowers or when it's flowering, it doesn't produce those seeds and it doesn't spread. It stays in a nice clump and it doesn't go under the ground like regular spearmint or peppermint. So it grows bountifully, easily. It tastes good. It smells good. It's a wonderful support for a tense nervous system. It's been used to help assist better digestive systems, support a healthy digestive system. And Even if you read in the old herb books, it'll give you paragraphs full of things it does. And my favorite was even cures baldness. And I think the reason they say that is because it's so good on the nerves. Like this is the cup of tea if I have a friend over in the middle of the day that I would just love to offer them lemon balm because it's just like a grandma's hug. It's just so comforting.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Makes me want to get some lemon balm right now. Um, like it just sounds, it's like, oh, it's like a grandma's hug. Who wouldn't we need, who everybody needs that. It's just right?
Right.
Just sounds
I think
amazing.
it Yep. And then the Latin name is Melissa officinalis.
Hmm.
And all plants that have the species officinalis means that they were in the official pharmacopoeia or like the drugstore back when Linnaeus named plants in the 1500s. So like Melissa officinalis, it's the common also it means well the official. But then if you think of Thymus officinale, Salvia officinalis, sage, in other words, thyme, Dandelion taraxacum officinale. So all of these plants, whenever you're looking at plant lists, or if you ever see that the Latin name, the species, or the second name is officinalis or officinale, that means it was the original medicine of the time. So that's fascinating too.
Yeah. No, it really is. And it makes me think of when I was a little girl, we spent the summers on this island I grew up in Sweden in Scandinavia. So the archipelago has, over 25,000 islands or something. So I grew up on this island in the summer with no electricity, no running water, no telephone on the island. And my grandmother was one of those people that had everything wrong. She had so many surgeries, and I think she ended up in the medical school books because they would always joke, we don't really know why you're still alive because they took out so many parts. And she would
Wow.
sometimes get these sores on her legs. And my dad was a physician. And she said, no, 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 I don't need any more medication. We're just going to go to the island. And then she would pick the dandelion leaves and she would just put the dandelion leaves on her legs. And then, she'd be sitting in her chair and my dad would come and he would say, all right, how does it look now? And he would lift on the little leaf and he would say, wow, it looks a lot better. So I don't even know what that did, but you probably do. You probably do. Why the
Well,
dandelion leaves would be so good for that. And she literally healed these sores on her legs with she just picked the leaves and just put them straight on her legs. She didn't do anything to the leaves.
you're right. So I'm just thinking they were cooling. These were probably heat lesions, something that was some heat situation inside of her body and getting out, um, through the skin. And so that would be a nice cooling thing. Dandelions, are diuretic, so they help to pull out moisture. So I could see how they could, help to pull out some of if they were weeping at all those sores. Yeah, that's a great story of just how something so simple can do so much. It's
Yeah, I
it's
mean, it's
really
fascinating,
a lot of that.
right? It's like
Yeah,
that your story with the child with the bee sting. It's just instantaneous. Um,
right.
Right. And what can people do? So there's so many people that have just a patio. They don't really have a yard where, they have the dirt. They might have a patio, especially people who live in California, where I spend a lot of time. The yards are the population is so dense that
Yeah,
most of the houses are so crowded, and a lot of people just have like a patio for a table and a grill, so they don't really have a yard. But they could get little garden boxes or maybe plant things in pots. So, do you have any recommendations for all of those people?
absolutely. First of all, if you're there in California, they can just take a walk and find rosemary in hedges, right? You have rosemary everywhere. Rosemary has so many qualities to it. It's besides tasting and smelling good, but it is a really common herb for supporting good brain health. So it's stimulating. It would be good in a bath, like if you're feeling lethargic, almost like an adaptogen herb that would help to move your blood a little bit. You have rosemary there, but I would also just recommend having a couple pots for culinary herbs because those culinary herbs have a lot of medicine in them. And I feel like just when I make soups with sage, thyme, rosemary, and things like that, that I'm making really like my own family flu shots. So I would recommend, knowing clean places they could wildcraft and pick some things just from the landscape there is amazing. And you use aloe all over the place. That's amazing. You got beautiful cultivars that flower beautifully there. And but I would also have a pot of some nice tea herb. Like they could switch it out. Sometimes have a mint pot of mint. It'd be nice and cooling for the California climate. Or lemon balm, for example. You could just have a pot with some herbs that they could be making their own tea. So, even if they had two pots, one for cooking and one for tea, I think that would do a lot to enhance their life, and it would certainly engage them in their own process of healing or knowing how to support their own bodies, and making that connection of having a relationship with those plants.
Yeah. So if they, for example, have a plant, a mint plant, and they want to use it as a mint tea, would they then pick the leaves and have them dry first, or?
Oh, that's a great question, right? Because you don't need to dry well, there's some herb people who think you do need to dry your herbs in order to make tea, but I don't. I pick my fresh herbs all summer and I still have flavor and color in my tea. But the trick to making a pot of tea at home is you should really boil the water. Don't microwave it or think, even those on-demand water is hot enough. You really have to boil some water. You pour it over your herbs, seal it so that none of the volatile oils or the smells and the taste, the part you want to taste, evaporates out or volatilizes away. So just seal it, or even a teapot works well, just with the design of the teapot that holds those essential oils in. And then let it just steep for 10 minutes at least to get the flavors. And if you wanted to make your teas for the minerals, like you might with dandelion leaf, nettles, or some of the other alfalfa, clovers. I know you could find some clovers in California. Those things are very high in minerals. In order to extract minerals, you need to keep them in that water for at least 2 hours or longer. So when I make a pot of tea, I usually blend aromatic and flavorful herbs with some that are more mineral rich. So I'll pour my hot water or boiled water over the tea, herbs, cover it, let it steep for 10 minutes, have a cup of tea, and then I might pour more boiling water over that and let it steep overnight, and then drink it in the morning for the mineral rich infusion.
Wow, very clever. Do you have any recommendations for, you mentioned, like thyme and sage, kind of like a flu shot. Are there specific herbs to take to stay healthy and, not maybe not get the flu? Is there
I
anything
think
people can do?
sage. Okay, I would pick sage as something that's easy to grow in California, or almost anywhere really. It is a Mediterranean herb, and you can grow it in the north. If you have heavy soils, it just needs drainage. But the Latin name of sage is Salvia officinalis, and salvia means to heal. So I have used sage internally to keep me well, like if I was getting a sore throat or something. Um, or I use it on top of my skin topically for like for example, my dog got caught in barbed wire once and was had deep wounds. And I used sage on that just as a poultice. So I would simmer the sage a little bit, put it in a cloth and put that on her wound, and it would help to disinfect and to seal it up because it's a bit drying. This isn't the herb you really want to take every day, especially if you're like me. more of a hot and dry constitution. But for like an acute situation, it's perfect. So I think sage would be my number one choice there. And echinacea, of course, is great too.
Right. Yeah, to make everybody stay healthy during the flu season. There's lots of things, and
Yeah.
elderberry too, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh, of
Yeah,
course. You got that
elderberry,
right.
which is really great because it tastes so good. So
Yeah.
lots of people like the elderberries. So how can people learn more about you and your books?
Well, I have a website, forelementsherbals.com, and that four is spelled out FOUR, forelementsherbals.com. And so I have like a video there of my farm showing people around my farm and our practices on that. And I'll be teaching a class on the Shift Network. And uh, let's see. So, or they can contact me to teach classes too. I love teaching. I'm at that age where I say I passed the hoe. Now the 20 somethings are hoeing. Now
Right.
it's time for me to teach, right?
Yeah, you get past all that knowledge on to the next generation, right? Because you hold so much
Yes.
wisdom about how everything is connected. You're not just an herbalist, but you understand the interconnectedness of the entire web and how everything works together. So we'll make sure to
Thank you,
put
Dr. Rod.
we'll make sure to put the link in the podcast notes. So it's forelementsherbals.com. And how can people find your books?
Well, it is on Amazon. It's available wholesale through Chelsea Green, and I do have it on my website under specials. I think
Sounds
it's
good.
on the drop-down menu.
All right. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be a guest on the podcast today. It's been a pleasure to have you share your knowledge with all the listeners.
It was such a joy to meet you, and thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it and enjoyed my time with you this evening.
As we conclude this episode, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude for your presence within my community. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe, comment, like, and share this podcast episode. Join my free newsletter in the show notes and receive new podcast episodes delivered right to your inbox. If you resonate with the interconnectedness of mind, body, and soul, and are motivated to embark on a journey of personal healing, I invite you to connect with me at drlottie.com. Together, we can pave a path towards transformative healing in your own life.